This week's guest is Mr. Ian Bishop. We're really pleased to have him on the show. If you like this video, remember, give it a like, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button. Let's get into it. Here's Ian Bishop. We're going back to the West Indies. We were in Barbados a couple of weeks ago talking to Roland Butcher, and with all the action that's going on in that part of the world, we thought we'd had to get back there with the second test getting underway later this week. So I'm joined from sunny Barbados by a West Indian cricketing legend and surely one of the most famous commentating voices in the world these days. It's a great big welcome to 98 Odd Out to Mr. Ian Bishop. Ian, welcome, sir.
Thanks for having me. Thanks so much. I'm honored.
Just tell me what the weather's doing so I can depress myself even more.
Okay, I'll be realistic. I look to my right and it's bright and sunny outside. I actually had to close the curtains because it was too bright coming through my glass sliding doors. But I hope it stays that way because in Antigua we had a few rain interruptions and that was very unseasonal for that time of the year as far as I could recollect. So I'm hoping that Barbados gives us its best side weather-wise.
I know Barbados very well. Is it a slightly different weather pattern to Antigua? Because whenever I visit Barbados, you get rain showers, but they move on pretty quickly.
Similar in Antigua. They come, they go because they're small islands and the wind is obviously so strong. Antigua fascinates me perhaps more than Barbados. Barbados can give you a good rain shower. In Antigua, I remember when we used to host the regional T20 tournament there, the old Stanford thing. We hardly ever lost a game, and that used to be down in I can't remember the time of year, second half of the year, rainy season, and the rains would just pile in, blow over, and we'd go again. So I'm hoping Kensington Oval is usually very good anyway. So fingers crossed.
Is Allen Stanford's name still mentioned in the Caribbean, or is it a bit of a dirty word?
That was the first time I used it for about 10 years. I usually say the old regional T20 tournament, but in this case, I think you'd have very, very little understanding of what I meant. West Indian viewers, for me, I don't know whether it's used. I very seldom use it because I think it brings back a little sense of mixed feelings in terms of the structure of the thing was helpful, but the other side of it is something that I don't ever talk about.
Yeah, for UK viewers and listeners, there is a really good documentary about the whole Allen Stanford affair that's on Sky Sports Cricket, which you can download via the website. But we're not here to talk about negative things, Mr. Bishop. We're here to talk positive. So for our younger viewers and listeners, they need to be informed. First of all, we're in the presence of West Indian bowling greatness. And when you first started playing international cricket, you made quite an impact. And I'm actually slightly older than you, so I can remember your arrival on the scene very, very well. Yeah, I can remember that run up, that side on action. Very devastating.
When you said greatness, I looked around to see Curtly Ambrose was behind me because he's the great one, and he's in the room behind me, right behind me here as I speak now.
Who's that?
Look, Curtly Ambrose.
Oh, right.
Oh, yeah, those are the great guys. Ambrose, Walsh. Yeah, I can bore a hole through the thingy. I'm sure he'll accommodate. I'll talk to him later, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, himself and Walsh and Michael Oling, who was very good to me as a mentor when I started out at Derbyshire. I went to Derbyshire actually because he was a Derbyshire. Surrey had asked me had approached me actually to go to Surrey, and Mikey sort of swayed it the other way up at Derbyshire. Not sure why. But no, cricket with all the injuries, even with all the injuries, it was a dream come true because when I was young growing up, obviously as an admirer of West Indies cricket and its players, I never thought that I would one day be one of them. And Bishop running in from the Kirkstall and just never sounded right until it actually happened. So I'm honored and privileged.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite an era of those players coming through. And, you know, when I was a youngster, Michael Holding, it was Viv Richards with the bat, but Michael Holding with the ball and that incredible, smooth, kind of elegant action of running in. I mean, the longest run up. I don't think anyone had had a run up like that before him.
Right. West Hall, as we're in Barbados, West Hall might throw an argument your way, but that's another one I'll have to talk to when I see it.
Another great name of West Indian cricket. That's right.
Yeah.
What are your fondest memories of playing the game?
There are a lot of memories, but I remember the first time I heard my name mentioned to be selected for the West Indies. I'd actually jumped on a plane, headed to the UK, jumped on a bus, and I'd headed up north to play for a club called Evenwood Cricket Club in 1988, very early in 1988. And I got off the bus, and the gentleman who came to pick me up said to me, "Bishop, I'm sorry, you're not going to be playing for us this season." And I was in shock because I traveled all this way across to the UK, hours on a bus from London up north. And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, you've just been selected for the West Indies." And I mean, that was a shocker to me. So he took me to an apartment where they had another local West Indian guy playing called Andrew Light, the late Andrew Light. And I remember getting into the apartment, watching the sun go down, watching the sun come back up. I didn't sleep a wink that night. And then I had to go back to London to meet up with the guys, the West Indies team the next day. And I don't think I spoke a word when I got into the room with Dujan and Richards and Greenwich and Haynes for about 2 weeks. So that was the start of it. In terms of a memorable game, I don't know. I just think the whole thing was fascinating. Fantastic. I have a few regrets in terms of games that we lost. World Cup semi-final in '96 in Mohali comes to mind, which I don't ever talk about that much. But no, I was privileged to play with Viv, to play with Desmond, to play with Gordon, and then to play with Courtney and Kirtley for a little bit longer was great.
Viv celebrated his 70th birthday last week, yes. And he doesn't look to be any different. The hair's a little thinner, but otherwise he looks the same.
He's kept himself remarkably well. I can see the difference, of course, having known him from the younger days. He's still very fit, but the muscles used to be bulging so much back in the day. But he's one of those guys who's aged brilliantly. And I was actually saying to some of the guys the other day, said it on air as well, the one thing I loved about Viv, and I still do, is that I don't ever remember him raising his voice to me when I played under him. He was my first West Indies captain, but he didn't have to. He just had to look in your direction, and you knew whether he approved of you or he disapproved of what you were doing. But he always let you know where you stood with him. If he did not like you, he would say to your face, "I do not appreciate you or what you're doing." And I find that endearing in a sense, because he's not one of the guys to go behind your back and say something and in front of your face say something else. Very straight up guy. And I really do hope that he has another 25, 30 years on the face of the earth, because he means so much to people like myself. He taught me about the passion of playing for West Indies and for people that look like us. So I don't want that to ever be lost.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of that natural swagger that he had. You know, I can see him coming down the pavilion steps, chewing that gum.
You know, I wish I had appreciated the couple of years that I played with him a little bit more, because sitting in the dressing room, he'd just be sleeping, and he'd be sleeping while the game is going on, and he'd just jump up out of his sleep when a wicket fell and grab his hat and put it on and start chewing the gum and walk out to the middle. But I didn't appreciate his power as a player until one day, I can't remember whether it was 92, maybe. I was playing for Derbyshire against Glamorgan, and the spirit just got a hold of him that day, because I played a couple of games against him and he hadn't scored, and he got 100 in Pontypridd that day. And he backed away. I thought I was in the prime and operating at high pace, and he just backed away for one shot and slapped it over extra cover down to an old tree somewhere. And that just said to me how several great opposition bowlers in years gone by, when he was at his peak, because he was coming to the end of his career then, how they must have felt with this man. He, most destructive player I've ever seen.
And then you were witness to the kind of progression in that team, as you said, when Viv and Gordon Greenidge and Desi kind of moved aside. Then there was the new breed that came through. Now you mentioned Curtly Ambrose, Courtney Walsh. Was Lara part of your playing days as well?
Yeah, I played from school actually with Brian from the under 14 level. I went to a school called Belmont Boys Secondary, and Brian was like the more established and esteemed Fatima College. So we've been battling against each other since the under 14 days. And I sort of preceded him into the West Indies team by a year, perhaps. I was in 88, he came in 89. Only because he had other duties, I think like an under 19 World Cup, otherwise he would have been there almost immediately. Yeah, so we transitioned. I saw the transition, and looking back now, I was saying to Curtly Ambrose the other day, we were discussing it, how clearly the demarcation was in terms of that great era. Marshall was still there, Dujon was still there, Viv obviously, Greenidge, Haynes, and Courtney Walsh had straddled that era from 84 into us. And we sort of, as Curtly said, these are Curtly's words, I'm not qualified to say this because I don't classify myself as a great bowler. Curtly certainly is. He said he could see how the standards or the abilities had just started to drop off after Greenidge and Haynes and Marshall and those guys moved on. And on reflection, I was saying I could also see it. So I could give some revisionist history. When people say the West Indies started struggling from maybe 2000 or just before, I could see a progression of struggles coming through even from the late 80s. You know, and I love the way that Mr. Ambrose really said it. You know, he said the standards and the abilities just started just tailing off a little bit. So, but still, Curtly said we still had the ability with himself and a few others, Lara, excellent player, Jimmy Adams, Chanderpaul, to carry on winning, even though structurally it had started to dip.
West Indies has always had, even I think the West Indies were lucky in the 70s and 80s and the 90s of having so many world-class players. I mean, it was like a freak almost because, and there was this conveyor belt. But even in this sort of decline, but even then in the decline, there have been flashes of brilliance. You've still had great players in the modern game. You look at sort of Shiv Chanderpaul, Chris Gale, that's right. And even, you know, right up to Jason Holder and some of the guys now. Can you put your finger on what has happened that the success has been much harder to come by?
I don't, look, I won't pretend. I cannot sit here and pretend to be the know-it-all on that situation. And I won't pretend to. I think I can give you a part structurally in the Caribbean. I think we let it slip a bit with thinking that we'd continue to have the Lloyds, the Marshalls, the Walshes, the Ambrose, the Laras coming through without too much effort. That wasn't the case because there started to become other distractions of technology, of social life changing and evolving. And so pulling at the market share of the cricketer, we did not have the finances nor channel the finances into investing in better structures, pitches, coaches, coaching setups. All of those things are apart. What I would say is that, as you rightly said just now, if we go back to Ambrose coming through, Lara coming through after that, Gale, Sawan, Holder, Bravo, all of those Pollards in a different type of game. There is still talent. There has always been talent, cohesively though, and for Test match cricket, mostly challenged. It's been a problem of all of those issues of which I speak. So I see the West Indies Cricket Board, Cricket West Indies, of restarting the academy. I like that. I love that. I think get young guys in there, get better coaches, some of the Haynes, the Greenwich, all those guys coaching at the grassroots level would be so fantastic. So there's talent there.
The other thing that I notice, I'm a regular visitor to the West Indies.
Right.
It's still the passion and the interest. You know, you go on a weekend, you go past any piece of green or, you know, the local clubs, there are games going on and people in there nicely starched and pressed whites and play with enthusiasm. And then under the trees, there are some of the old timers there giving their views. And, you know, also if you go into any rum shop, you can easily get into a very intense conversation about the game. The passion is still there.
I've stayed away from the rum shops for obvious reasons. I wouldn't put my hand up to say that I'm a man of the people and you can find me hanging out at the street corner. It never happened anyway. But things have changed, you know, as you would very well know, in some ways. There's still, for example, here in Barbados, there are call-in programs. In Antigua, there are call-in programs, and they're fierce call-in programs. Some of them with blinkers on, but it tells you a little bit about the passion. This one should be dropped. That one, drop the entire team. I play this. You go to Ghana, get rid of everyone. Why is Hetmaya not playing? You know, so the passion is still there, but it's always been a hard region to govern because you're talking about disparate territories, different governments, long flights. I remember when we were growing up in Trinidad, I don't know if you've ever been to Trinidad, but I grew up in Port of Spain. So there's the Queen's Park Savannah, which we call the biggest roundabout in the world. It's about a couple of miles around it. But within that, there used to be, I would say, 20 cricket grounds spread across that entire pasture. And we played on matting pitches. And every weekend, as you said, there'd be 20 games of cricket going on at different spots, some crossing the others. And there used to be the mix of young players, senior players. Now what I'm hearing, I haven't been around club cricket for a couple of years, is that there are a lot of young guys playing and not a lot of older guys mixing and sharing their knowledge. So those are some of the areas that have changed. And that's why I think an academy in each territory has to be a must. Not to mention T20 cricket, which West Indies have become better at, has taken a hold of many of the young players.
Yeah. Is it because you think they kind of look at the lifestyle and the rewards and they think, well, that's for me, but I'm not going to get that from playing Test cricket, maybe?
Well, it could be, you know, it could be part of it in that I remember when I was coming towards, I was still playing club cricket in Trinidad. So I was like about halfway maybe through my international career. And it started getting harder and harder for more senior players who had to work during the week to make available themselves for the entire weekend from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the evening because they had families. They had to look after those families. The social world was changing, more demands on work life and family life. And so T20 cricket has hit a sweet spot for that reason. It's also fitted in well with West Indians who are aggressive batsmen, mostly, not all. Craig Brathwaite would disagree with me totally, and Nkrumah Bonner would say, that's not the current version of me. And so it sat well with the Bravos, for example, to display their all-round skills, bowling, Narayan, bowling, Pollard batting, and the time span was shorter. And so when the Gales and the Pollards and the Bravos and the Narayans and these guys and the Badris, who are excellent, great players in this format, started changing the narrative, I could see why young players gravitated towards that and why little kids coming through wanted to play a reverse sweep rather than a forward defensive. So it's all played a part.
So we mentioned a lot of names there. Bravos, Pollard, Richards, Marshall, Lloyd, Lara. But there's one name we haven't mentioned, one name. Now let me remember the name.
Oh. All right, okay. That's embarrassing.
The moment that Mr. Ian Bishop wrote himself into cricketing folklore with one of the most memorable bits of commentary. But before we discuss it, I was just doing a bit of research there, and I came across a really interesting story from that moment. So there we are in Kolkata, It's the climax of the game. It's reaching the, its height. You're there on mic, but alongside you is David Bumble Lloyd, who we had on this show last week. He was talking.
All right.
Talking really beautifully about Shane Warne and Rod Marsh and the sad news of their passing. But run me through this story. So it was actually he that was on commentary holding the microphone in that last over, and then he passed it to you for the final ball. Is that the right story? Yeah,
that's absolutely 100% spot on. So obviously for some folks that don't know, and a lot of people know, but in commentary, if you've got two, sometimes you have three commentators, but in that case we have two. So there's one guy who's a lead commentator, as you very well know, who's calling each ball. And then when the action happens, the color commentator comes in and describes, let's say, a boundary, and then it goes back to the lead. And Bumble was slotted in to lead that final stint. And at some point during that thing, he recognized where the game was heading and who was likely to come out on top, and he just said, "You go ahead." But I was contented. I mean, there's video evidence. I was happy to fulfill my role, because I don't like crossing other people's role. I think it's very defined. So I thought, without sort of understanding the pressure that he put me on under at the time, now that I look back, it was a lot of pressure, that. And it was just very kind of him. That's who Bumble is. Very selfless, no ego in what he's doing. And I just sort of was driven by the moment, because the West Indies had come into that tournament with a little bit of a siege mentality. There were issues going around behind, as came out eventually with Samuels and Sammy and so forth. And there was a whole build up to it. So yeah, Bumble, absolutely right. And it's pressure. Why is there pressure? Because in those moments now, you have to ensure that your words are suited for posterity, because those are moments that will be replayed time and time again. So I didn't plan anything. What you heard was spontaneous reaction to a situation. Thank God for that. It was the action on the field that defined the moment, not the commentary. I always say that to people. It was Carlos and Marlon who made that moment. Nothing to do with the gentleman shouting his stupid head off in the commentary box.
Those that don't remember the detail, just to give it a bit of context. So it was the last over. It was England against West Indies in the T20 World Cup Final in 2016. West Indies needed 22 off that last over. Was that was what it was? Was it 22? I mean, it looked like a fairly impossible task. But Carlos Brathwaite just started, and it was Ben Stokes was the bowler as well.
Yes.
It was the most incredible situation. Your commentary.
Well,
remember
Marlon, talking to Marlon, actually, I don't know where Marlon said it after, but the West Indies, I don't know how many people remember it. The West Indies had dug themselves into a hole, because West Indies cricket, as Sammy always says, great man, Darren Sammy, always says they're a boundary hitting team, a six hitting team. And I've always argued, Darren, too much focus on six hitting and not enough focus on scoring off more balls. And they dug themselves into a hole, and they ended up coming down to that last over. And I thought, there's a mountain to climb here. And Marlon said that he just said to Carlos, because it might have looked hopeless, he just said, you just swing for the hills when you get on strike there. There was no sort of planning of theories and hit it here and hit it, just swing for the hills. And that was beautiful. Carlos, God bless him, etched himself into cricketing history that can never be taken away. So that was it. Yeah, we can discuss more. Yeah.
No, and what was another lovely moment when they were presented with the trophy, that the West Indies women's team were also world champions at that time, and they all came together and wild celebrations with both teams showing their trophies to the world.
Yeah, the West Indies under 19 had won a little bit earlier in the year. The West Indies women's obviously had won earlier then, and then the men, and it stuck around. So it was a trifecta for the West Indies. And for Carlos himself, I remember, I've always told the story that the reason that those words came out, I'd been to a men's meeting, Saurav Ganguly had invited me, to a business meeting the day before, and there was a question and answer segment with some businessmen who turned up, and one of them asked if there's anyone else to look forward to for the West Indies. And obviously it was Chris Gayle and those guys. And I remember Carlos was one that wasn't being spoken about. He was actually bowling superbly during that tournament. And we talked about fast bowling, Carlos and I, for the last couple of years leading into that, because he was trying to bowl faster and really was doing a good job in that tournament. And I just spontaneously answered a question and I said, Carlos Brathwaite, he's built like a house. Remember that name, kind of thing. And so when the moment came, must have been subconscious that line just floated out. I didn't plan it and it just came out. But Carlos's bowling in that final is not something that many people speak about. You go back and watch Carlos's final bowling figures, the people he got out, and you realize that perhaps he should have been the man that should have won all the plaudits there. And he did. People do remember him, but Carlos was brilliant. Ben Stokes, on the other hand, has had his redemption, as we said on air the other day. World Cup in 2019, he was the main figure, and he had divine intervention with the ball ricocheting off the bat, the Headingley innings. He had the Bristol incident, as you very well remember.
Yeah.
But I was saying to Butch on commentary that, you know, when I really started believing more in Ben Stokes, he scored 100 in the IPL for Rajasthan Royals, I think 2 seasons ago down in the UAE. And his dad was ill. And we were specifically told he's very emotional. Please, when you interview him, please don't ask him about that, because he scored 100 and given that sign that he and his dad had personal. And man, he came down there to the presentation and I had to interview him. And all I could think about asking was, what does that 100 mean to you? And you know, when a guy pauses before he answers a question, he looks away. And that moment seemed like forever. And then he looked back and his whole expression changed. And then he talked about the fact that it means a lot to him because of X, Y, Z. And he almost cried. And that was the antithesis of the tough guy that I knew. And that's when I realized this guy is so human. And people don't recognize the pain that he's going through and has gone through in the past. A genuine fellow, to a fault maybe, but a really superb guy. So I'm happy to see his redemption has taken place.
Interesting, very interesting. Bringing it to the now, you're in Barbados, as we know.
Yeah.
One of the great cricketing occasions is West Indies versus England at Barbados. Many great matches down the years. It's Barbados is, as we said, cricket crazy. The atmosphere at Kensington, although it's not the same. There's I've got a problem with the amount of Brits that outnumber locals.
Okay.
You know, it's almost like a home game for England. But you know, I can remember going there in the 80s and 90s, and you know, it was conch shells, it was horns, whistles, noise. It's changed a little bit, but still, it's a great occasion. And we come on the back of a drawn test in Antigua. But I think both teams can draw positives from that performance, and looking forward to this game.
Yeah, the whole crowd thing is not something that really started just this tour. I think we're going back a number of years where the visitors have outnumbered the locals, perhaps back to, I was trying to remember whether it was the last time I played against Mark Butcher in a test match here in 1998.
I was there.
You were there. Yes, correct. I was trying to remember if there were little signs of that even back then. I know not too long after that it became a thing. So look, we played some memorable test matches against England, and here in Barbados, 1990, I remember I heard Lloyd Barker, the umpire, on radio here talking the other day about when he gave Rob Bailey out caught down the leg side, and everyone was saying that it was Viv Richards charging up the pitch, intimidating Lloyd Barker. Lloyd said, no, he's spoken to Viv, he's spoken to Rob since then. It was not anything to do with Viv. He just thought that Rob was out, and it took him a while. Great, lovely man, Lloyd. So I do think it's a wonderful occasion. I wish there'd been more local supporters, But if the visitors have more finance or it's skewed towards them, there's nothing that we can do about it until more locals decide they want to have a review of that old tape of guys crawling under the fence to watch Michael Holdings over to Jeffrey Boycott back in the 80s. The old YouTube footage of that is superb. So I think when you say the West Indies can take positives, yes. England can take positives, yes. I'm worried though. I'm worried. If I take my commentator's hat and put it aside and speak to you as a former West Indian, I'm concerned that I so badly want the West Indies to win. But I think if Mark Wood had been fit on that final day, if a couple of umpiring decisions had gone the other side, I wonder what the outcome would be. And I'm worried about this West Indies batting on a pitch that might do a little bit more. Ollie Robinson could be back, so I'm concerned. But as an atmosphere, an England-West Indies match is so... I wonder if you remember when we played them up at Sabina Park in 1990 in a one-day game, and I had to hit 4 off the last ball to win the game off Angus Fraser. You probably wouldn't have remembered that.
Yeah. That was a famous tour.
Yeah, I almost didn't make it out because had I not hit that for 4, they would have hung me, my clothing, up as an effigy at Sabina Park, because the ball before, Richie Richardson was at the other end and he said, Bish, wherever this ball goes, if it goes through to the keeper, you have to run. And Angus Fraser dipped this ball down the leg side and it just passed on the outside of my pattern. I tried to leg glance it with fine leg up and I missed it. And Richie was halfway down the pitch as it went through to the keeper and I was just frozen. And I did not run. I forgot to run. And therefore I had to hit 4 off the last ball. So if I had failed to do that, I may not have been here today. That was one of my great memories of a contest between the West Indies and England.
It's always great. And I don't share 100% of your pessimism because...
No, it's not pessimism. It's not pessimism. It's my West Indian concern.
England struggle. They've always struggled in the West Indies. It's never been an easy place to tour, and the games have always been incredibly well contested. So,
why do you think?
Well, it's a place where England love to tour, and I think the West Indies, it's a case of settling lots of old scores, and
right.
You know, there's a lot of pride to be played for there.
Right, but I would argue that when we played, yes, there was that pride for that, but there also had to be the pride for every encounter. The juices just flowed a little bit more, because Kirtley, I never could put it this way, and he's a good friend of mine, my former roommate who threatened to throw me off Shirley Heights one time as a roommate of his in Antigua if I didn't behave myself in the room. Those were the days of roommates. He said when he came into the team, the culture, he wasn't so much in tune with all the historical narratives, but just the culture of the guys who were more senior passing it down was what stood him. And then as he learned about what Lord Larry Constantine fought for in the 1950s up in Liverpool and what has happened up at Yorkshire since, all of those bookend why we should feel a sense of pride in playing and our sort of cutting our own independence in the world. So I think there is that, but I still don't know that helps the West Indies batting lineup to the level I would like to see. Come on, help me out, seriously.
Maybe Chris Gale can send some of those great big bats that he uses, and
it's not the bat. No, I'm not pessimistic, but I do have a little concern. I think our bowling is in decent shape. It's starting to come around. Jaden Seals is a lovely young cricketer. Kemar Roach will be outstanding at home. Jason Holder is brilliant at Kensington Oval, all round. But the other guys need to step up. So if they can step up, I think West Indies will have the edge. If they don't step up, it could be a little tighter.
Well, we shall see. We all wait with eager anticipation because it's one of the sport's great occasions.
Thank you.
Let alone cricket. Now, before you go, on this show, music plays a big part as much as cricket, and with all of our star guests, we always like to ask for a musical request. And Ian Bishop, you are no exception. So we would like you to request a track for us to play straight after this interview.
Oh, I hope that comes off the internet, because you have no idea what I will ask you for. Because I am not a man who felicitates the normal West Indian thing of soca music and calypso and reggae and all of that. I am more of a man of the cloth. So I head towards gospel music. And so anything from Kirk Franklin, Wanna Be Happy, maybe, is something that I would gravitate towards. And I'm going to test you on that.
We'll find it. We will find it.
Oh, good. Good man. Good man.
And it's always eclectic. Well, this is why I love asking this question, because, you know, when people give honest answers, the musical requests and the taste of music are always so surprising. It's incredible. Dinesh Karthik, when we had him on, same question, and he came up with a Coldplay track that he liked. I'd have never ever said he would choose Coldplay.
Yes, one of the more, I suppose, modern eclectic tastes of folks from the East, who's very sort of westernized in his musical taste, I suppose. A mix. Yeah. Lovely kid, eh?
Oh, yeah, very,
lovely kid. Lovely kid.
Well, enjoy the cricket. We'll look forward to hearing your famous voice on the airwaves. And regards to the rest of the guys, if anyone else wants to come and talk to us, and
I'll talk to Kirtley. I'll talk to Kirtley and see if he can spare you a few minutes before he returns to Antigua after the series, and we'll try to do the game justice. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. An absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Mr. Ian Bishop.
Thank you.